Human rights are not natural rights.
Okay, this is the final episode of Bad Philosophy with Rocky Mystery. I was going to do another one, but I decided to cut it out. I decided this was enough. And not that I'm going to leave him alone entirely, but I think this is exhaustive at this point. This episode is on rights, which I have been trying to figure out where he thinks rights come from in all his videos, which he commits to naturalism fallacy. His idea of natural rights, I tried to watch his natural law video. Very difficult to watch. Makes no sense whatsoever. It's like the naturalism fallacy committed over and over again. But also his ideas of rights, as I point out in the abortion and like some of his more political videos, are nonsensical. They don't make any kind of logical sense whatsoever. They most closely resemble Locke, but Locke actually put some thought into his rights. So they most closely resemble Locke. Also, when someone says natural law is not a term that refers to a specific kind of philosophy. And also, when you're talking about the legal definition of natural law and the ethical definition of natural law, they're usually delineated. But when people say natural law to me, I think of Thomas Aquinas. That's who I think of. Because, like, you could really consider Kant to be natural law. You could definitely consider Locke to be natural law, but it's just any idea of like rights and legality that comes from like the natural state of being human, which doesn't mean it proceeds from nature. It means it proceeds from reason. And he seems to get that wrong too, and that it's supposed to proceed from reason, not necessarily from nature. So I don't think he even knows what natural law is.
Human rights, even from the very name they are given, are collectively defined. As I've stated in the past, collective rights are highly problematic because collectivism is an ideology that does not recognize any definition of rights which does not stem from authority. Without authority granting rights, collectivists will deny that anyone has any rights at all. And this makes the individual obligated to the collective for upholding these rights.
We've been over and over and over this. He always says that you believe are collectivists, or which concludes pretty much everyone who doesn't have his same political ideology believe that rights come from authority or come from the state, and that in a state of nature you wouldn't have rights. Which that would be like Hobbes. Hobbes says, like, in the state of nature. Hobbes doesn't say in the state of nature you don't have rights. He says in the state of nature there's no morality. Now you would find somebody like this, like a cultural relativist might argue that there's no morality outside of culture. It's not what Kantians argue. It's not what utilitarians argue. So he's wrong about that. Being some kind of commonly held belief of people who about morality, or specifically about rights, because utilitarians deny the idea that there are rights. He is correct about that. They deny the idea that there are rights at all. Which is funny because utilitarians gave us the concept of animal rights, by the way, which I should do a video about. They gave us the entire concept. The entire concept of animal rights comes from utilitarians, a ethical theory that denies the idea of intrinsic human rights. So figure that one out.
As a person, I am wholly against collective rights because they enslave the individual to abstract ideals that have no basis in nature. It was when I first began to learn about social contract theory that I started to gravitate towards individualism, and John Locke was the first philosopher that opened my eyes to natural rights that are a very part of individual identity. Famously, it was John Locke's second treatise of civil government that set out how natural rights can be defined as freedoms stemming from your very existence.
Now, I know, like, talking about philosophy in like a 10-minute video is very difficult because I've had to do it before. It's incredibly difficult. But here's the thing: does Rocky Mystery believe in social contract theory or not? Because he made a whole video about how social contract theory is bullshit. But then Locke is a social contract theorist. So this entire idea of natural rights that he has comes from Locke, but then Locke's a social contract theorist. So, like, Rocky Mystery should have made a video at some point, which was this very complex breaking down of Locke, of the things that he agrees with Locke and things he doesn't agree with Locke. Because this is what Rocky Mystery does. He references a philosopher, but then does not tell you what he agrees and disagrees with them on most of the time, if he's using them as like an argument for himself. Now, when he's arguing against them, he does. Sometimes he'll say, oh, I do agree on this. Like when he dissects Nietzsche or dissects John Stuart Mill, he's like, oh, I do agree with this about them, but I disagree with this. He'll do that. But he never, like with the ones that he holds up and says, oh, I agree with them on this, he never tells you exactly what he disagrees with them on. In fact, he did a video on Ayn Rand as well and said that he does not consider himself to be a Randian or an objectivist, which, no shit, he wouldn't be, because he disagrees with her on certain things, but he doesn't spell out at the time what he disagrees with her on. Like, the thing that I know he disagrees with her on, like, for instance, is abortion, obviously. But his philosophy is heavily Rand influenced. Heavily. More than Locke influenced, I would say.
And I will link to this below. Your freedom, your right to benefit from your own labour, and the right to property are all natural rights because they all stem from natural behaviour essential to survival. Individualists aspire to protect natural rights as opposed to denying their very existence, like collectivists.
Alright, since he says this whole idea of rights comes from Locke, Locke argued that you have these rights based on nature. Like, this whole idea of social contract theory was to preserve the freedom, because Locke's whole idea is that you're more free in the state of nature. But he said the entire idea of being in a society meant giving up some of your freedom, which is why he's a social contract theorist. And Locke thought the best society was one that preserved your natural freedom as much as possible. It has nothing to do with things you can achieve in the state of nature. Like, I can kind of understand, if I want to give Rocky Mystery any credit, how you can misinterpret it that way. But that's not it. It's not about things you can achieve in the state of nature. Because obviously one of the things I think Locke got wrong and Rousseau got right was obviously there are things you can only achieve in society. And those things make you more free in certain extent. More free because there are things that you can only accomplish collectively. But Locke was really worried about it. But Locke, he knew how artificial the structure was. And that's the thing. And like the whole idea of money. Like Locke spends a lot of time, if you read Locke, on this whole idea of money and the exchange, using money to buy goods. Because you're not exchanging goods. But he thought that like the kind of redistribution of wealth may be justified in preserving the idea that if you were just exchanging goods and services. Like he uses, as I mentioned before, this analogy about an apple orchard. And like if you own this orchard and you only have apples to trade, well, apples go bad. So you couldn't just hoard all your apples. You would have to trade your apples constantly in order to get the other things you need. So that's why Locke would have favored redistribution of wealth to a certain extent. Because of that. And for the very reason that Rocky Mystery opposes it. Because he thinks redistribution of wealth preserves naturalness, not is against naturalness.
Collectivists oppose natural rights because they can't be legitimately taken away or denied. This means that social and economic engineering is out of the question.
By the way, Rocky Mystery thinks your rights can be taken away. If you express an idea that he doesn't like, he thinks your free speech rights can be taken away. Just watch his video on free speech and watch his video on banned socialism. He thinks that if you say things that he doesn't like, your rights to free speech can be taken away. So the fact that this fucker like portrays himself as being some beacon of freedom is absolutely hysterical.
One of the few genuine concerns that collectivists have with natural rights is that historically natural rights have been granted by God. This has been exploited by monarchs that claim to have a divine right to rule, and natural right fell into this authority. But John Locke showed that natural rights do not have to stem from God, though he did not express a problem with people believing that natural rights were divine, as long as the conclusions drawn did not oppress the individual.
This is the problem with the naturalism fallacy, as he does. Anyone can argue something's natural. Like, let's take Rocky Mystery's like kind of idea about libertarianism. Or like, actually, I was arguing with some dude today who said that the representation of minorities in STEM fields is completely proportionate to them in the population. Well, I showed him that that is not true. I absolutely showed him the facts. It's not true because 28% of the U.S. population is non-white. But the non-white minorities that are represented in STEM fields is 16%. And then he just denied that. He just said, well, it's because the Hispanic population has grown so much. Now, the Hispanic population has not grown so much that it offsets a 10-point difference. That hasn't happened. And that's not 10 points based on their, not even on minority population. That's 10% based on the entire U.S. population. In 20 years, the Hispanics have not, like, grown that much in this country. Not in, like, a 20-year period, which is how long you would have, to like, even a generation to even be able to say that it's thrown off because of the generational data. And then he just would not give up on this. And that's because he thinks that it's natural that white people are superior. And also I point out Asians. Asians are overrepresented in STEM fields compared to their proportion to the population. Asians and East Asians, like Indians. And he was like, oh, well, why do you think they're a separate group? Your whole argument was minorities, just trying to like change the whole freaking argument. And it's because the reason that they don't have that problem is because they are economically advantaged compared to Hispanics and African Americans. He was making a completely natural argument that STEM fields are filled with white people, therefore white people naturally are better at STEM fields. This is the kind of argument that people make and people like Rocky Mystery make all the time. That's a problem with it. It can always be used to advocate for the status quo. Now, as for coming from God, natural law and natural rights do come from God, as I mentioned Aquinas. Though it's even earlier. It goes back to the Greeks. But they made kind of reference to God too. Locke makes explicit references to the rights coming from God. Now, Rocky Mystery is an atheist, so he wants to distance himself from that, which is fine. I think Locke's idea of natural rights could work without God. But he's ignoring a ton of stuff from Locke. He's ignoring Locke's advocacy of social contract theory, his advocacy of democracy, representational democracy, Republican democracy, his advocating for a certain amount of redistribution of wealth. Like, he ignores all the stuff about Locke that he just doesn't want to deal with, or he never really read Locke, which I don't think is impossible.
Locke also went a step further by stating that natural rights could also be drawn from rational inquiry, and this is where I stand as an atheist individualist.
Locke was making that argument from the beginning. Like, the natural inquiry. This is where he doesn't get. Locke is saying that it's based on reason, not based on nature. Like, he argues that it's based on nature, like, over and over and over again. In fact, I tried to watch his other videos on rights, and I just kept getting upset because he kept making these arguments about nature, and he kept bringing in empirical data, too. And, like, he doesn't realize there's no amount of empirical data you can bring in that would make the basis for a moral argument. There's none. Like the is-ought fallacy. There's no amount of it. In fact, I watched one of his videos and we're 10 minutes in before he actually brings any philosophy into it. Instead, he's just talking about his ideas about how civilization began. Like the entire time, which is erroneous, a lot of it, and pure speculation. But also is backed up by this incredibly ridiculous pseudoscientific justification. And like 10 minutes in before he gets into any philosophy. It was just absolutely ridiculous to me. So, but Locke was doing that from the beginning. Locke was saying it was based on reason. Aquinas is too. Aquinas believes the rights come from God, but he's still basing it on reason. Aquinas wasn't just jerking off the whole time and reading the Bible. Wasn't just pulling shit from the Bible. Like he was influenced by Aristotle, and his whole idea of natural rights and natural law is very complex and is based on reason and logic. Even though he was Catholic and he brought a lot of theology to it, and it's very God-based, but it's not just nonsense. It's not just appeal to the Bible. Aquinas is probably the most interesting and relevant, explicitly religious medieval philosopher to read, because his influence on ethics and political philosophy is still relevant. And theology, obviously, if you're not interested in theology, then you can skip a lot of Aquinas, but he still has relevance in ethics and political philosophy. If you take a course, like say like a survey course in political philosophy, and they don't discuss Aquinas, then I don't think they taught you political philosophy very well, because I think you need to bring up Aquinas at some point, because a lot of the groundwork of certain things come from him.
Human rights have become the preferred template for collectivists because, for the most part, they're drawn from appeals to authority and popularity.
Once again, straw man. The whole concept of human rights as we know them today are Kantian. They're Kantian based. They are deontological Kantian ethics. After World War II, like the concept of human rights, like expanding. A lot of countries in Europe, like after World War II, that's when the UK like started to think about having an expanded benefit system for citizens and socialized healthcare. There were some countries that already had socialized healthcare. In fact, when right-wingers want to say that the Nazis had socialized healthcare, they had socialized healthcare before the Nazis, as Germany did. It existed all the way back to at least World War I think. So Germany already had socialized healthcare. But like things like that were expanded after World War II, basically based on Kantians, and that was because we took a very utilitarian approach to World War II, where you could just bomb the shit out of a city with civilians, like the Blitz in London, or Dresden in Germany, or the U.S. dropping these bombs on Hiroshima just to win, or just to intimidate the enemy. And after World War II, people took a good long look at this, and the concept of human rights, which are Kantian derived, and philosophers at the time who were Kantians, like really pushed for this expanded idea of human rights. And groups now that, like the UN, which formed after World War II, and a lot of left-wing groups really latched onto this idea of rights that was essentially developed from a Kantian perspective. So like the human rights that we have now are very much forged after World War II, because of how horrific World War II was. And specifically for the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and the dropping of the bomb on Nagasaki, and us looking at that and just seeing how horrific we were, like how Dresden was bombed, how London was bombed, and just having this idea of rights that are concrete and that everyone should have and should be universal regardless of what country you live in. Like, how are these granted by authority? Because they're supposed to be for everyone in the world. Like basic human rights. They're for everyone in the world. If your country doesn't recognize them, we have a problem with your country. They're not relativist or authoritarian.
Even the name human rights indicates that they belong to groups, not individuals, the word human being an adjective defining a collective species.
I'm sorry, I don't really have an argument, but isn't that the dumbest fucking thing you've ever heard in your life?
It's important to note, though, that a few of the ideals behind human rights are very noble and could even be compatible with natural rights. This includes Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to life, liberty, and security of person.
Now, the reason we call them human rights, Rocky Mystery, is because they're universal. So they include all rights. They include negative and positive rights, or negative and positive liberty. Now, I hate the term negative and positive liberty. I think you have a right to autonomy. Like, I think you have the right to not be crushed by society. Like a society that has... Because it really is true that if your society is oppressive, then you don't have freedom in that society. Unless you're on the top of the totem pole. Like, everyone at the bottom should have just as much autonomy as everyone at the top. Now, I say autonomy. This is not a Marxist argument. It's not a communist argument. Not having the same stuff, not having the same income, not having the same life completely, it is the same autonomy. That is what people should have. That's what he's going to object to.
A second would be Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Article 10 is also an example. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. In summary, the articles within the Declaration that recognise every person's right to own property, start a family through natural reproduction, and to be recognised as a free person are compatible with natural rights.
Now I want to talk about one of the rights that he thinks is okay. He thinks about being like charged with a crime, that you have the right to like kind of just like due process. Now, if a person is poor and they can't afford a lawyer, does he think that they have a right to a lawyer? Because that's not really in there. It's in the U.S. Constitution. I'm sure like many other countries have it in their constitutions as well, that you have a right to an attorney. Here you get a shitty attorney. You get like a public defender. Because the one time I ever was charged with a crime, I got a public defender. I ended up getting dropped, thank God. But she was like the worst lawyer imaginable. She kept telling me to plead guilty. And no matter what I wanted, she kept telling me she had to do what I wanted. Like, she made it clear that she had to do what I wanted, but she was really resistant to doing anything I wanted at the same time. Like, would try to talk me out of it, but at the same time, she would tell me, I have to do what you wanted. The only way I could think that she could be a worse lawyer is if she didn't tell me that. If she just said, no, we're going to do this. But I had the shittiest lawyer ever because I was a college student and I had no money, and I had the shittiest fucking lawyer ever. If it had gone to trial, I would have been at a huge disadvantage because I basically had the worst lawyer imaginable. And I've talked to other people who've had public defenders. They either got in trouble when they were young or they were poor or whatever, and they ended up with a public defender. And that is pretty much a universal sentiment toward public defenders, is that they are so overworked and have so many cases that they can't really help you that much, and they try to get you to plead. Like, everyone I've talked to who's had a public defender says they always try to get you to take a plea bargain. No matter how much it's in your favor, no matter how obvious it is you're innocent, no matter how unlikely it is that you'll be convicted, they always try to get you to take a plea. And like, if I had taken a plea instead of waiting, then I wouldn't have gotten the dismissal. Like, she wanted me to take a plea like the first day she talked to me. Like, take a plea. She wanted to go to the prosecutor and like get an offer for a plea. But eventually they ended up dropping it. So if I had taken a plea, the judge dismissed it. If I ended up taking a plea, I would have been fucked. Like, for nothing. So, that's the thing, is like, we need a social apparatus for that one. So like, he doesn't realize with that one that actually is collectivist by his definition. It's not just, he says it could be compatible with natural rights as long as you don't help people in any way economically who are disadvantaged, I guess.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, however, is a very ambiguous and suspicious document in most respects, and these all revolve around collectivist interpretations of what individuals are entitled to, as opposed to what they are capable of, which is what natural rights aim to recognise and protect. Collective rights always fabricate entitlements that some have no ability to achieve themselves, and thus it becomes the responsibility of others to grant these alleged rights. This is not the same as granting charity, which is a very natural human response to suffering. Instead, these entitlements, masked as charity, become a coercive force designed to obligate innocent people to the behest of others.
Whenever he goes into this spiel, it always makes me sick. He doesn't seem to get, you're born, fucking poor family. Let's say you were born to a father who molested you. So you're all kinds of disadvantaged right away. You could have all kinds of problems right away. And you're born poor. And you live your whole life like this. So as you become an adult and you're already screwed up beyond belief because of the circumstances of your birth and disadvantaged economically, and let's say you can't get the psychiatric help you might need because you might need that if you were abused as a child. As somebody who actually grew up with an abusive upbringing, like, I'm so glad that when I was in college they gave me a therapist, even though once again it was a shitty therapist because it was free. But they gave me a free therapist because I don't think I would have got through college because of the abusive household I grew up in. If without a therapist, I was still technically paying for it though because it was granted by the college. So, like, if you have all these disadvantages, yeah, people who didn't have those disadvantages should help out the people who have those disadvantages. It's just a very basic concept. He wants to say he's not a dick because he believes in charity, but this guy probably never gives anything to charity. Guys like this never do. They've done studies to prove it.
Here are some of the most prominent examples in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that demonstrate this. Article 22 states that everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. What this article sets out is a socialist policy which demands that each person is entitled to government welfare. This is incompatible with natural rights because a true right can only be protected, not granted, which rules out welfare.
He makes no argument. No argument, which what he usually does. He just asserts things. It makes no argument. Why is that fair? Why is it fair that it's like that? The example I gave. Like the example I gave of like somebody who has like been through hell. They've been a childhood through hell. And they don't get any help. They didn't choose that. Like these guys like to say that their ideology is based on getting what you deserve and getting what you chose. And like getting the results of what you chose. So if you made bad choices, well, you're just going to have to lay in your bed. But the people like that, they do not make their choices. He's ruling out all welfare, which includes, under their definition, a huge amount of stuff. Like the Heritage Foundation did this very famous, like this famous, ridiculous, rhetorical study where they like tried to claim that the majority of the U.S. government spends on welfare, and they included things like libraries. If you actually read the thing, they include like libraries as welfare and just things that most people wouldn't even think of as welfare. And if you tried to cut those things, you would be in big trouble. I know I was living in Ohio a few years ago when they talked about cutting libraries, and Ohio is not like the biggest like most progressive state. Like they probably spend way more in their libraries in the state I live in now than they do in Ohio. And certainly Seattle spends more in their libraries than any other city I've ever lived in. But they tried to cut libraries in Ohio, and it was a huge thing. Like the governor found himself like with all these people protesting the cutting of libraries, because most people, they don't consider libraries to be welfare.
This second example is even more collectivist. Article 23(1) states that everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. This is identical to demand number 8 of the Communist Manifesto, wherein each person has equal liability to labour. No one, however, has a natural right to work without acquiring it through merit and negotiation.
This is one of my favorite, like, little rhetorical things that right-wingers do. Like, they try to portray, like, the idea of everyone having a job as being bad. Like, the idea that everyone who wants a job should have one. Like, President Kennedy said that. And I had a friend who, when I was younger, who's really right-wing, and he said that he found when Kennedy said that to be abhorrent. It was abhorrent that he said that. That he said that everyone who wanted a job should have one. What a horrible thing. And, like, I don't think a president could say that in our country now. If Obama said that tomorrow, it would be on the news and he'd be attacked, like, ridiculously. I think that's just kind of stuff that they used to say, though. They used to say stuff like that. Our politicians did in the United States. They need to start saying stuff like that again. Like, if Elizabeth Warren ran for president, she would start saying stuff like that. She's already said stuff like that as a senator. We need politicians to say stuff like that. But let's look at his claim about the Communist Manifesto. I have it right here. 8 of the Communist Manifesto demands equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. It's not really identical at all. I see how it's kind of has some similarities, but no, it's not the same. It's not the same claim. Him saying it's identical is just factually incorrect. And the Communist Manifesto, like, does have, like, some wording of things that would strike you as extreme. Like, they want to get rid of all inheritance. And I've said before that I don't think you should get rid of all inheritance, but I think, like, the idea that you shouldn't tax inheritance at least at the rate that you tax income is absurd. And when you, James, mirrored my video, there was a guy in there who, like, found that to be unethical. For me to say that inheritance should be taxed at least the rate of income, like, I think if you don't think that, you're crazy. If you don't think that it should be taxed at least at the rate of income, that somebody gets a huge windfall from their parents or their uncle or whatever, and they get to keep it all, but if you work for that money, you get taxed. Does that make any fucking sense? Like, right-wingers should be against that for the very principles that they claim.
Though they do have a natural right to benefit from their own labour without this being stolen, or what collectivists often call wealth redistribution.
I will point it out again. John Locke was not against wealth redistribution on principle, the way a libertarian is against it. He would have probably wanted it to be limited to as small amount of redistribution you can to make the system work and to preserve the natural rights of human beings. But he would have been in favor, not against it on principle. He wouldn't have considered it theft. Probably not. Maybe. Like, some people say Locke's like a libertarian. It depends on how you interpret Locke. I seriously doubt he would, though. He definitely does not have the views that Rocky Mr. E does, because Locke believed in democracy. In fact, Locke believed in democracy in almost a way that was just too confident, because he believed that people would preserve their own, they want to preserve their own rights, so when they were in the majority, they wouldn't vote to take away other people's rights, which U.S. history and history of some other countries have proven this to be false. But Locke was not against redistribution. The only people who are against redistribution on principle are libertarians. Like, if you're against it on principle, and if you're not against it on principle, and even people who identify as libertarians, Jon Stewart does this whenever he has a libertarian on the show. He talks about redistribution, and he gets them down to specific points, which when you argue with libertarians, I know there's some people who watch my videos who are libertarians, which if you argue with libertarians, get them down to specific points, because once you agree into some form of redistribution or some form of social welfare or something, then we're just talking about proportions. Because you have to be against it on principle to be able to call it theft. Because it's not theft. If you, because even Ayn Rand says, Ayn Rand is in favor of progressive taxation. If you read Ayn Rand. Like, I keep having these idiots come on my Ayn Rand video and go, you don't understand her philosophy. She says explicitly she believes in progressive taxation. Read her. Like, they say I'm wrong about things that she says explicitly. There's, like, no interpretation. It's like, it's frustrating.
Another article of the Declaration I find highly questionable is Article 25.2, which states that motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection. According to this article, mothers are entitled to special protection while fathers aren't. This makes mothers more equal than others, as Orwell once wrote.
Now, Rocket Mr. E should be the last person to lecture somebody on the concept of equality, because he doesn't understand it, and his abortion video shows that he definitely doesn't understand it when it comes to reproduction. The reason it says mothers here is because of women's prenatal care and care for them while having their children and things like that. That's why it says it there. That's why it says it there. It's not to exclude fathers, because there's included social welfare for fathers. What they're talking about is women who are about to give birth, women who are pregnant. Men don't get pregnant. That's why it's not there. Rocket Mr. E hates women, and he has daughters, which fucking scares the shit out of me.
Considering parenthood is a natural right, and there is no reason at all to believe that either a mother or a father has a greater right to be a parent, this article makes a mockery of natural parental rights. What's more, this article contradicts Article 16.1 of the Declaration of Human Rights, which states that men and women of full age, without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion, have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and its dissolution. Fathers being denied equal access to their own children upon the dissolution of marriage is therefore a violation of this article.
Wow, is he reaching? Yeah, moron. That's because they're talking about two different things. They're talking about women getting birth and being pregnant, and then they're talking about parental rights. They're talking about two different things. Your straw man of the first one is in contradiction to the other one. But you know, these are written by the same people. So they're fully aware. They understand nuance, Rocky Mystery.
Rights are not entitlements, and they come with responsibility. In the present culture, many will conflate right with charity, using this to justify coercion in the name of a self-righteous goal.
It would be like if somebody said that people of certain political ideologies were banned from public discourse because they didn't like those ideologies. It would be exactly like that.
With this in mind, perhaps the website A Voice for Men, rebranding the men's movement to the men's human rights movement, should reflect on what a right is very carefully, instead of bowing to the politically correct dogma, forcing everyone to adhere to a collectivist definition of rights.
I want to thank Rocking Mr. E for pointing out how stupid he is, because I wouldn't have noticed this if he hadn't pointed it out just now. Rocking Mr. E used to identify as a MRA. He doesn't anymore, I was told. And I've verified this from his blog that he doesn't. Probably because his views are so strange and stupid that most MRAs are even smart enough to see through them. But he just said at the beginning of this video that human rights are collectivist because they define rights by a collective of people, which are humans. Aren't men a collective of people? So all this time, like, I think this one was recorded when he was still a men's rights advocate. so wouldn't being a men's rights advocate also make you a collectivist? And he used to say that men's rights activists could not be left-wing. That was one of his big things. That was one of the first things he did that pissed off men's rights activists. I don't think they can, because I was arguing with the MRA the other day who expressed some indication to me that he was not right-wing, if at the very least, because he disparaged Fox News and compared me to Fox News, which is hysterical. But showed that he was not right-wing. But I don't see how you can, because men's rights activists are reactionaries, and reactionaries are right-wing. All right-wing politics is essentially reactionary. It's essentially the people who are like, no, don't change anything because I'm used to it. That is right-wing politics. I know I'll piss people off for saying that, but that is right-wing politics right there. It's resistance to change because I'm used to it. That is what it is. Even more so than people who are rich and want to keep their money. Some people will say like right-wing politics is all about that. No, because there's poor right-wingers. It's, I'm used to this. This is how it's always been. So therefore you can't change it. Or they want to go back to a fantasy version of the past, which didn't ever exist. Which Rocky Masteria wants to go to, and all these guys want to go to a fantasy version of the past. That's what the Tea Party wants. That's what all right-wing politics is. I know I'll say this because people will be like, oh, you just dismissed an entire half of the political spectrum. Because, yeah, there's no golden mean, really. There's nothing like in the middle that it makes it inherently right. Your side's just insane. Your side's nuts. They've always been nuts.